education is supposed to be. Good. I'm glad somebody's recording this too. But yeah, this is what education is supposed to be. All right. We live in a globalized world. We have access to technology, even at almost any level throughout the world. And this gives us the perfect opportunity to get out of the four walls of the classroom and bring in the world to the students. And at this point, it can happen pretty much anywhere. We're doing it right now. There's people from all over the world that are in this session. And, 20, 30 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. So, excuse me, we as educators, as best we can, should try when possible to actually bring in the world to our students. And that's what I've been doing for many years. And just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm sure some of you know where Nebraska is. Oftentimes when I travel around the world, they're like, California, but Nebraska, I'm not quite sure. But grew up in a small town in Nebraska, and I actually had my first travel experience when I was 14. I went and spent the summer working in an orphanage in Asut, Egypt, and that changed my world, right? That made me realize what was out there and made me excited to see what else in the world I could learn about, I could experience, I could go see, I could even taste. And so that made me want to explore the world. My father was a teacher. My grandfather was a teacher. In fact, yeah, you can't see it, but over on my wall, I have my great grandmother's teaching contract from 1907. And now my nephew's a teacher as well. So we've got 5 generations of educators in my family. So I couldn't help but combine my love of exploration of the world and teaching. And if anything, as was mentioned, I've been teaching almost 30 years. I got to keep doing something to keep me excited and interested, but also try to keep the kids engaged. So as I have brought that into the classroom, I just want to spend a little bit of time today giving you an idea of at least what I've been able to do. Now, I will say up front that I teach at a very nice high school in Los Gatos, California. It's in Silicon Valley. I live in San Jose, where Silicon Valley is. So I'm lucky. I have access to resources that sometimes people don't. But I also today want to talk about, regardless of the resources, there's still ways to do things that really engage students and, again, can bring the world to the students in a way that gets beyond the 4 walls. Now, I occasionally will be stepping off to the side just to pull some things up on the screen to show you. Again, instead of being on a kind of a traditional Zoom call where I'm just sitting in front of my computer, fortunately, I've got a few things that allow me to, I can show you basically at least the front of my whole room. So I have a very good webcam that lets me have you see what's up on the screen. And as I said, when we were teaching on Zoom for the year, I came to my classroom every day to teach from my classroom. One, it kind of normalized it for me, but 2, I was able to continue to teach as I had. And a lot of the students said that they appreciated me being in the classroom instead of sitting in my kitchen when I was doing this. But again, I'm extremely fortunate to be in the United States, in a place like Silicon Valley, where we were able to continue to educate our students during the pandemic. I'm well aware some of you are in locations around the world. As you'll see, I have done a good deal of work in Kenya, and I've worked with schools in Kenya, and I know in places in the world during the pandemic, students did not have access to education. And so, which of course is unfortunate at a level, but hopefully we will be able to move on from there. So just a little bit of a background on how I got into teaching from overseas and had that opportunity, and maybe give you guys some ideas on what you can do as well. So as you guys know, probably the Global Schools Program, part of this was created by Jeffrey Sachs, Columbia University. And back in 2008, he was giving a talk up in San Francisco, and I went to hear it. And afterwards, he was signing books. I was familiar with the Millennium Village program that he had started through the United Nations. And I was teaching a class where that could be brought in. And so as he was signing books, I said, you know, I'm teaching this class. It would be really interesting to incorporate the Millennium Villages into what I'm doing, at least in some way. And he said, well, that sounds kind of interesting. Here's my contact information. Get a hold of me. And I followed through on that. And Millennium Promise was just getting started. And he and his wife were working on this program to connect schools in the Millennium Villages to schools here in the United States. And I was asked to come on and help as a consultant with my background in education and anthropology to make this happen. And in 2009, he said, well, we said, well, let's give this a try. So we worked one elementary school in Massachusetts, worked with a school in Millennium Village, and I got connected with Lois at the Kisumu Boys School in Kisumu, Kenya. And I'm going to show you a few photos, just so you kind of know who I am talking about as we go through this, to give you a better idea. And I'll zoom in here a little bit, so hopefully, and let me go up. There we go. Everyone can see it okay, I'm assuming. So this is Lois and her daughter. And starting in 2009, I started to work with Lois, and we started to do cross-curricular activities with our students in Kisumu, Kenya at the boys' school, and with students here. As an example, there is a book by a Kenyan author, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and he wrote The River Between. And the students in Kenya at the boys' school, they were reading that book. So I had my students read that book as well. And then we did a Skype call between the two classes so that the students could actually discuss the book. You know, it's one thing for me to have them read this book that was written by a Kenyan author and try to explain my understanding of it. It's a completely different thing to have students in Kenya in real time be able to describe their understanding of that book to my students here. And then to have my students say, well, we think this is how we read it. And so again, this was kind of the beginning over a decade ago of where I tried to start to pull students together from different parts of the world to give them the opportunity to interact again in real time, not just an email, not just a letter, not just, well, it's not that real time component, giving them that opportunity. And I'll show you another clip so there's Lois. And so we would do, and hopefully you can, and this isn't, this isn't the best image, but let me just play just a touch of this.
Then between geography and history, choose one, and then in the submitting a three answer, your can choose the three.
I'm going to go to about here.
Okay, let's go.
It's a little hard to see.
Yeah.
Good. So the girls here, we started to work with the girls' school in Kisumu, Kenya as well, along with the boys' school. And we were doing a Skype call. Again, this was a while back. And the girls sang my students the national anthem. Right? So the kids got to actually hear it. In fact, in one of the sessions we did with the boys' school, we started, and it was 8:30 in the morning here in California. And several of the boys said, "Is Kathy in class?" And of course, all the students said, "Oh yeah, there's Kathy, there's Kathy." And the boys said, "Kathy, we know it's your birthday today." Well, how did they know it was Kathy's birthday? Well, the students had worked together for a while, so they were sharing social media web pages. They knew it was Kathy's birthday. So they sang happy birthday to Kathy from Kenya, both in English and Kiswahili. So the first people to sing Kathy happy birthday on her birthday were boys from Kenya in real time. And so again, creating that connection, and what that does that is so powerful is it begins to create a sense of sympathy, of understanding, and something that they can connect to in a way that a textbook never will, in any real way. So as we did this, things continued. And then after about, and let's see, where is it? Yes, here we go. Here's a photo. In 2011, I had the opportunity to go to Kenya and visit the schools. And that was the first time that I taught my class back here in California via Zoom, well, again, Skype at that time, from the boys' school in Kisumu back to my students here. And we went to visit the girls' school, and let's see if we can zoom in. Yeah, just a little bit on this. Here you see, and let me see if there we go. That's a little bit better. You can see the image a little bit better. There we go. Here are the girls Skyping with my students back in California. Right? So having that real interaction and being able to hear each other and begin to understand each other. And we did take some of the shirts from Los Gatos High School for the boys to have. So I spent a week teaching my classes via Skype from Kisumu so that my students could interact with the students and I could help them better understand the environment, again, in a way that a book just can't do. So that was my first teaching from overseas experience. Now, just a little bit of background related to Kisumu itself. And on one of the days, here we go. Again, these images aren't super great, but this one's a little bit darker, but we took some of the boys to the first Millennium Village in Surrey, in Kenya. And we went and spent a few hours, and the lady sitting in the middle is Barack Obama's grandmother, She passed away sometime in the last year or two, but Mama Sarah. So, I was actually able to, and this was when Barack Obama was still president. So to be able to talk with her and then that day bring that back to the students, like that was such a great way to have the students have a connection. My students back in California. So it was a fun way to bring that to the students. So that was my first experience, right? To have the students connect with other kids. And I realized that being able to teach from someplace else in the world, one, was very exciting for me, but two, I saw how the students were reacting to this. And I just saw the question, and do throw up questions because I can actually see it. I've got a nice big screen behind me. What I do want to make sure that anyone that is interested in more information, I'll make sure that you have access to my contact information. I would absolutely love to talk with other people and pass along anything I can that would be of help, and even maybe make some connections with you as educators, and maybe we could even do a Zoom call with our students, right? So that build this community of educators who can bring the world to their students. Like that's what I'd really love to do. Now, the first time I did the Skype call with my students, I was sitting in front of a computer, a desktop. This was back in 2011, and cell phones didn't quite work the same back in 2011 as they do now, right? And so, yeah, I had to sit in front of a computer screen, but I'll tell you a little side story related to this. Yes, this is wonderful for my students, but what was really fun for me as a father was I was able to use Skype, and my wife took the computer into my son's room, who was about 6 at the time, or 7, and it was time to get ready for school. So I was able to wake my son up from Kenya so he could get ready for school. So again, we can get really kind of excited about the technology and how it connects people. And so that was the first time that I taught from overseas. And so over the coming now more than a decade, I've had the opportunity to teach from some amazing places in real time for my students. One of the gentlemen that I met at the girls' school in Kisumu, his name's David Muya, and he is the most amazing person that I think I've ever met. He's done some amazing things. And in 2016, he was working for the United Nations, and he actually was working at the Kakuma refugee camp in northern Kenya. And so I teach a social entrepreneurship class, and the students get a toolkit of information first semester. So they learn about anthropology, sociology, psychology, and a little bit of business. And then second semester, it's 100% project-based. They work with people in different parts of the world to create something for good. I tell them at the very beginning, it's not about a handout, it's about working with. And so some students started to work on what is called the solar suitcase. Won't go into the details, but it's a small solar suitcase you can carry onto the plane, so people have access to electricity, lights, charge their phones. So my students here started to work directly with students at the Kakuma refugee camp in northern Kenya They found what could the students really benefit from. Well, oftentimes the electricity may not be the best in the camp. So they said, well, if we had access to light, we could study later into the evening. So they worked together. They found a way to get the solar suitcase, and I hand delivered that solar suitcase to the Kakuma refugee camp. And then I taught my class from the camp. And so when it was morning here and evening there, and I was able to bring in some of the students so they had the opportunity, well, what's it like to live in a refugee camp? And so again, those real life connections are so incredibly powerful. A few other places I actually was doing some work in India, in Delhi, India. So I spent a week teaching my class from India. And, I would go out and do things during the day. And then when it was evening there and morning here, then I was able to tell my students what I had done during the day, what I had seen during the day. In 2019, I taught my class from Paris. I went to the Paris Peace Forum. And one of the really fun things now, instead of sitting at a computer, I can use my cell phone and my AirPods, and I can take my students anywhere. And so one of the days, and I'm assuming if some of you probably will recognize this, but here we have the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. So I actually taught my class in real time from the Louvre. And I just walked around the Louvre and I had my students tell me what they wanted to see in the Louvre. Yes, it's a big museum, so I couldn't get to everything, but it gave them the opportunity to engage with the material and the paintings and the sculptures in a way that, again, a textbook just doesn't. It just doesn't give that opportunity, because I could walk around it. And so that was fun. But also in the spring of 2019, I had an amazing opportunity to spend the week teaching my class from northern Iraq. Now, as a child of the 80s, as an American, I was always told that Iraq was the enemy. Saddam Hussein was the enemy. And so to be able to go there myself, it was good for me, but it was amazing for the students. And let me show you one clip, and hopefully this will. So at some level, this is kind of meta, I suppose, but this is me in Iraq teaching at this point on Zoom, and I had a video camera in the back of the classroom so I could record me teaching from there so I could show it later. So it's a weird mix of things, but let me just play just a touch of it. It might get a little noisy outside, but I can show you. So we'll lock out. Oh, I know. So I'm going to try this now. So you guys can. There's a tree. And a flashing fine. Oh, there's a barber. I did get my beard trimmed while I was in Colorado. See, look, there's a toy store. Oh, look at little bears. Somebody was staring at me. A lot of people stare at me, but that's okay. You see that? Yeah. They're making falafel, and then yeah. I could hear my kids before I ate my lunch. Oh, very good.
Say hi. Yeah. Yeah, he made last night. Yeah, he made me food last night. It was really good. So this is a different. Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm taking my students, so this is an Erbil in northern Iraq, and I'm taking my students on a walk. I'm introducing them to people and allowing them to hear, see. I wish they could have smelled it. I wish they could have tasted the food. It was phenomenal, right? And later on, as I was walking down the street, I met an American who grew up in northern Iraq and who was back to visit parents. And my students were able to ask him questions. My students were able to engage with him. And again, this is something that simply will never come from a book in any real way. I do realize that this may not be practical all the time. I also am very aware that not all teachers get the opportunity to do something like this. I'm also very aware that seeing where so many of you are from around the world right now, you may want to, but your administrators won't let you. So I get that sometimes you may not even have the support. And in fact, sometimes even the teachers I work with at my school don't quite understand what I'm doing. And in fact, occasionally, some people think I'm going on vacation. No, I'm staying up till 2 a.m. to teach my students here in Los Gatos. So it's not really a vacation. It's a way to engage the students that can be so powerful. All right. And so as the students actually get to see me, interact with me, and another really amazing thing that comes from these connections is, I'm going to go back to the schools in Kisumu, the boys and girls schools. This isn't just about, in my mind, me taking my students someplace. This is also about developing real connections with people around the world. If people want to understand others, they're going to have to interact. They're going to have to connect. And technology, even in its simplest form, can help make that happen. If we really want to make our students global citizens, right? And I want to bring in a little bit about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? If we want these to work, if we want these to do what they're capable of becoming, people have to, at some level, begin to go places, even if it's just virtual, to better understand how they work, why they're important. And that's what having students interact in real time on things like Zoom help create. That's what's going to create global citizens. That's what's going to create sympathy and even empathy for the next generation in the United States, in Kenya, in Liberia, in India, and where everyone's from on this call right now. I just tell my students, I'm like, look, you're becoming the adults. I'm just getting old. Take the opportunities you have, use the technologies you have to really incorporate a way to create a sense. Yes, I'm reading, I like reading the pop-ups in the chat too, because I can see that, but a real sense of connection. And I tell my students, you do not have to agree with other people, but take the time to listen. That's all I'm asking, right? And those connections, and I will make mention, this was a very surreal experience for me when I used Ngugi wa Thiong'o's book a number of years ago, I had sent an email to Ngugi wa Thiong'o and just said, this is what I was able to do. And several years later, I was flying back to visit family in Nebraska, and I was on an airplane, and I was reading Globalactics by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And as I was reading the book, I ran across, and let me just read just a brief little part to this. It said, in the midst of writing this book, I got an email from Mr. David Homa, a teacher at Los Gatos High School near San Jose. He wrote in regard to teaching my fiction in the Millennium Village School-to-School program, started in 2009 by the Millennium Promise Organization in collaboration with the Earth Institute of Columbia. And he mentions this. Now, I had no idea that he had put this into this book. He didn't tell me, which was fine, but I'm sitting on an airplane, and when you suddenly read your name, it's a little surprising when you didn't know it was going to be in the book. But I bring this up because of connections. I think one vitally important thing that I would like to pass along is, as educators, it's challenging. I'm well aware that some of you, the resources you have access to can be very limited. Sometimes administrators, sometimes the system itself doesn't feel like it supports you as an educator. But the one vital thing, and I tell this to all my students, and I'll say it here, be willing to take the risk to ask, because you never know what might come from a conversation, a discussion, an email. Reach out. And I tell my students, you're going to be ignored, you might be laughed at, you may never hear anything back, but occasionally there may be a connection that can create amazing opportunities. So yeah, be willing to take the risk to ask, just to see what might happen. This spring, talking about the last few examples of me teaching from overseas, this spring, in January of 2022, I was planning to go to Ukraine and teach my class from Ukraine. My grandparents came from Ukraine, and I wanted to visit anyway, and I figured great opportunity. I had gotten a plane ticket. I had a place to stay all set up. And then life happened, a war. So that opportunity unfortunately changed. The interesting thing about teaching from around the world is occasionally things in the world change that opportunity. So I decided that I still wanted to go into the general neighborhood, and I ended up teaching my classes from Croatia and North Macedonia. And that was an amazing experience. When I was in Croatia, one of the evenings when I was in the old town in Dubrovnik, I walked by a group of high school students, and I was teaching my class, and I saw them, and I asked my students, I said, do you want to go talk to them? They look to be high school students. They're like, yes, of course. So I walked over to the high school students in Croatia and Dubrovnik, and my students ended up having a half-hour conversation with these students in Croatia. And the fascinating thing, and I think you guys, if you teach high school students in particular, depending on where you are, form 1 through 4, like in Kenya, teenagers is the same everywhere in the world. There might be a few subtle differences, but let's be honest, teenagers are teenagers. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, right? They will talk about the same thing anywhere on this planet. And so it doesn't matter. And so my students it's one thing for me to say teenagers are the same everywhere in the world. It's another thing for them to be talking in real time to their peers someplace else on the planet. And so that gave them a great, great opportunity to see that, understand it, and make connections in ways that, again, I could never really make happen if I was just explaining it. This coming April, I am going to be teaching my classes from Mozambique and Eswatini, and yes, exactly. When war and nature and other calamities bump into trying to learn, yeah, it definitely makes it challenging. I'll be teaching my classes from the southern part of Africa for the week. I usually do a week before a holiday break so that I can do some exploration before or after. And then I spend 1 week, 5 days, teaching my classes from wherever I am. I am going to have an interesting opportunity this time to even take it to a slightly new level with my students. Now, this technology, I'm well aware, is not going to be available to most people. But just to give you an idea of what I'm going to do next, while I'm teaching, now when I'm teaching from overseas, I spend the day doing things, interacting with people, seeing things, and then when class starts here, I have to describe what I did during the day, who I met, the conversations I had. When I was teaching from North Macedonia, I took a day trip to Kosovo. And when I was in the capital in Kosovo, I happened to bump into the mayor. And I had an amazing conversation with him. So then when class started that morning here, I just had to describe it. Well, now what I'm going to do is I have a 360-degree camera. It takes video in 360 degrees. And so during the day, I will take videos of where I am, who I'm talking to, what the environment looks like in full 360. And then I'm going to download it onto YouTube VR, and I'll grab just 1 second. Again, this is kind of taking technology way beyond what most schools have access to, but I have VR headsets. And so what my students will be able to do is they'll be able to see where I was, who I was talking to, and they'll be able to see it in full 360. It'll be a completely immersive experience that I had just that day. And then during class, when I'm teaching from where I am, they also can visually see where I was. So again, this is pushing the limits a bit in what's possible. But I'm also going to be working with the virtual reality lab at Stanford, doing a research project with one of the professors in the lab at Stanford to see how of any value might virtual reality be in helping kids not just learn, but potentially develop, again, a greater sense of sympathy, empathy, understanding. So those are a few of kind of the extreme things that that we're going to be pushing the limits on to see. Again, I'm very lucky. I teach someplace where I have the support of not just the other teachers, but also of my administrators to give me the opportunity. But you also have to, I'm the only teacher that's doing this. You also have to have the drive, but I think what pushes me, even after 30 years of being a teacher, is hearing my students engage in a way that sometimes I don't, if I'm just standing here doing a lecture or they're working on something. To hear them laugh, to hear them to hear them want to learn. To me, that's why I think we as educators, no matter where we are in the world, to try to push the boundaries of how our students learn and what they're able to draw in. And why this is important to make these connections is, I'll go back to the schools in Kisumu. In 2016, my students wanted to do something to help, to give opportunity. And so I said, well, maybe we'll do a scholarship fund. Maybe we'll help put one boy and one girl through college in Kisumu. The kids were like, great. They came up with the scholarship questions. We had about 35 girls and 35 boys apply for the scholarship. And in 2016, the young man Abednego and the young woman Nicole were given the opportunity by students in my classroom to get that college experience. And in 2019, 2020, both of them graduated. And here, this is, let me pull this up. Here we go. This is Nicole. And she received her bachelor's degree in journalism and has had the opportunity to do some amazing things in journalism in Kenya. And then Abednego, I did go to visit them after they graduated. There's Abednego. And when I met with him, I said, when I saw this picture, I told him, I said, whoa, one, who's that old guy? And I said, two, he got his bachelor's degree in international relations. I said, man, maybe you should be a model. Well, over the last 3 years, Abednego has become a model in Kenya, is doing commercials, and is having an amazing life, right? The great thing about this is the technology we have today is allowing for connections between young people, between our students, in a way that never existed in the past. It's giving young people in other parts of the world opportunities they never would have had. No, we can't help every single person, but we can at least give opportunity to someone. And that's what is so vital about pushing the limits, taking the risk to ask, and continuing to be excited about how we as educators can not just enhance the students' learning experience, but more importantly, create global citizens with an understanding of the world around them in real ways that, as an older person, actually gives me hope for the future, which sometimes is in short supply. So, that to me is why I continue to do this, teach from around the world. And I think if anything, it just keeps me excited and interested. So those are the key things that I wanted to talk about. I definitely wanted to have some opportunities if there were questions. I would be happy to answer anything I can. I know some people were putting things in the chat. I can take a look at that. I absolutely want the opportunity, to make connections with all of you here, as we are from all over the world. Again, as I said at the very beginning, like, that's the most exciting thing about this. That's why I still do this, because I love having the opportunity to meet people from around the world and making those connections. So yeah, so I'm if there's any questions or anything that and I'm going to take this back just a little bit, and I'm going to take this off the screen. There we go. And I can take a look at the chat too. I had not. There we go. It's the chat. There. Yeah, and yeah, I'm looking at this. Yeah, that is definitely. I did like the acronym as well. That's a cool way to think about that with the teacher. That might be good to print out and stick on the wall or something. And that's a really important point. I like this. In ed tech deficient school context, global learning can still be achieved through books and other available means. It just depends on the creativity and innovation of the teacher. Yeah, the question is, how do we build the capacity of teachers to do so? And that is a challenge. And the longer you've taught, I think sometimes, I don't want to say the more difficult it becomes, but it can be challenging, because you want to push, you want to have that possibility. But it can come down to sometimes what kind of support you have around you. And I know if any of you have been in education very long, sometimes the longer people are in education, the more stubborn they get. The more that they're like, no, I don't want to change. I don't want to do something new. And so, yeah. And I think, let's see, Milton, yeah, networking, right? Creating, and what you guys are doing through the Global Schools program, right? Making those connections, utilizing those connections to, even when there's maybe some limited tech, ed tech deficient schools, that talking with others, making those connections can sometimes help with those potential deficiencies. And yeah, and I was just looking up, yeah, building meaningful relationships. I said that multiple times in one form or another. So yeah, that's really important. And well, yes, and here's a very important point. Yeah, Anna, in the district I'm currently working, there's a lot of emphasis placed on standardized tests. And I know when I've done work with schools in Kenya, oftentimes it's hard to sustain it, because at the state level, they're like, nope, we have to do these standardized tests. And yes, absolutely, doing connecting things to the SDGs is a waste of instructional time. How would you think we could work with the community to change the perception they have? And if I could answer that question in one sentence, I'd be a millionaire. But the thing that I think is important, and sometimes where you can, sometimes it just takes the teachers the willingness to, sometimes, I don't want to say sneak it in, but to put it into what they're doing. Now, changing the community perception, that's the challenge. And I sometimes I don't even think, and I'm not quite sure the meaning of community, but sometimes it's really about changing, administrators' perception. Again, I've been doing this teaching from overseas for over a decade, and I've gone through multiple principals and administrators. And every time a new one comes in, I have to say, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. And they'll give me lip service. They'll say, oh yeah, that sounds really cool. Okay, can I have the support? Well, no, we can't do that. Well, but it's beneficial. The kids can learn from this. So sometimes it feels like you're just pushing a rock up a hill and it just keeps coming back at you. But the most important thing is, if the young people can get excited about it. I have students that go home and be like, guess what we did in class today? Guess where my teacher was? Guess what I learned today? Get the young people excited about it. And sometimes that can help shift the community perception. It doesn't always work, but having them actually see it in a way that gets them excited, that can be helpful. And I totally agree with Milton. Again, there should be a balance between objective and subjective assessments. And yeah, how can you get kids to show what they actually know? Look, when I'm teaching my class from overseas, I can't give them a test or a quiz on that later. I mean, that just doesn't work. And sometimes I'll tell my students, you know what? Get a hold of me when you're 40 and let me know if what you learned in this class still matters. And now, that's being silly, I realize, at a level, but sometimes you don't know what's going to stick, because most students can memorize anything, but that does not mean they've learned anything at all. So there's that balance. But again, I know in some of the countries where you guys are zooming in from and where you teach, there's so much top-down pressure through state testing, through standards. So sometimes it really is, I guess, a matter of sneaking the content in, like the SDGs, to show where they connect, to get the kids at least a basic understanding of what they are, and to make those connections, sometimes even with what you're doing in the classroom, to these other contents. But you know what? If we have to sneak these things in to make our students true global citizens, sometimes you have to push the limits a bit to kind of get to the level that benefits who will become the adults in the future and can possibly make those changes. So yeah, those some really good ideas that you guys are bringing up. And let's see, I'm kind of looking at these. Yeah. Oh yeah, yes. And this is a really, definitely has been a challenge, the different time zones. That is the single biggest challenge, especially when I've taught from overseas, because most of the time it's been an 8, 9, 10, even an 11-hour difference. And so I'm up really late, but that's okay. I'm not as young as I used to be, but I think that's worth it. And time zones are the biggest issue. Time zones are the biggest issue when it comes to connecting the students together. Absolutely. When I very, very first started this teaching, connecting students, I'd actually have students come in like at 6:30 in the morning here, so we could Skype with the students in Kenya, so it wasn't so late. So that is the single biggest challenge, is to connect with the students. But another thing is that I've actually had my students as small groups, not even in my classroom, but do Zoom calls with other students at different times of the day, so they can at least create connections. I think it's important that some of this that I've talked about today, don't always think about it just being in the classroom. Ultimately, it's about making connections. It's about having students being able to interact. So sometimes that can happen outside of the classroom as well, potentially. Again, depending on your resources, depending on the tech you have, not just you, but the students. And so, yes, those are just all challenges. But if the challenges were too great, I still wouldn't be doing this after a decade. Ultimately, it's about the students having the opportunity, not just about the inconveniences it presents to me. And so I'm lucky, even after 30 years, I still love what I do. So that keeps me kind of going, because I love to see what the students experience, learn, and most importantly, what they take with them for the rest of their life. And sometimes I think as educators, we forget that. You never know, even one sentence you may say in your class that sticks with them and makes them see the world differently. And so even when you have standards you have to follow, even when you have tests that must be given and standards, that all of that, you be excited as an educator and slip things in, because you just don't know what might stick at some point. And that to me is something I try to think about. All right. And I'm sure you guys know this, but since we're all human, humans love stories. That's how we've passed basically everything along, as long as humans have been on this planet. So when you can fit in a story, even a little personalized story, and that can help. And great question. How about teachers do a pre-recorded video for the classes with time zone barriers? Yes, I've done that before. I thank you for reminding me about that. Like, that absolutely is a way to create those connections. Yes, that definitely works. You know, it's not in real time, but it still gives the students an opportunity to hear from someone else. Look, I would never say to my students, I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm not. There's people all over the world that know more than I do. Yes, YouTube videos for asynchronous work. Absolutely. And that actually brings up a really good point. You can create projects through asynchronous YouTube videos, through things where it is asynchronous, so that they still have some connection. It's better to have some connection than no connection at all. So yeah, you guys are bringing up some great ideas about how to make those connections beyond just real time, like I've been able to do. Yes, yeah, WhatsApp. That's all I use when I travel is WhatsApp. And yeah, what are some of the strategies undertaken at the community or municipal level to improve capacity and quality of education, especially in the developing countries? Wow, that is, yeah, that's a big question as well. And yeah, I'm just kind of reading these through as we go. Yes, ended up doing answering students' questions. I've done that as well, where you have somebody answer the questions, and sometimes what you can do, I just did this 3 weeks ago. I forgot to mention this. You know, there's been quite a bit going on in Iran of late, and we were talking about it in my classes, and the students were asking, well, what's going on? Why is it happening? And I have a friend who is a college professor in Tehran. So even though it was later in Iran, it was just her. And so she did a Zoom call with my class. It was 8:30 in the morning here. It was 6:30 in the evening there. And we did a live Zoom call with her, so she could actually tell my students from her perspective in Iran as a college professor, as the protests were happening, her perspective on it. I think what would be really cool, and there are organizations that have done things like this, but it would be great to create a clearinghouse of educators, right, that could say, okay, I'm willing to talk on this topic to your students wherever they are in the world. Right? I mean, this is something even the Global Schools program could create, is what teachers would be willing to talk on whatever, and you as educators could reach out to that other educator and say, and it could be pre-recorded or it could even be live. So yeah, a network of global schools to float ideas and hold online events. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why this is so important to do. That's why I'm so glad all of you guys are here, because again, I'm not the smartest person in the room. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while, but you guys are coming up with great ideas. So yes, create a theme, theme-wise monthly events or projects. Yeah, and the cool thing is if you do something like that, you know, you could do this. Take one SDG a month and create a project based around each one or even two, and then have students in different locations around the world do something related to that one SDG in whatever form that may take. And then everyone could share everybody else's work. It basically becomes a global group project, right? Sometimes we do group projects just within our classroom. Why can't the whole world be a classroom? It doesn't need to just be my four walls. And especially with schools that may not have quite as much ed tech as, say, I do, that still could give you the opportunity to do that. And so, yeah, there's just some really, really cool ideas. I think, let me check. There was one other, where was that? I did. I knew there was one other one I wanted to show you. This was 2019, just 3 years ago. That's Abednego having graduated. Yes. Yeah. Teachers can absolutely record themselves when they travel. I do that. And that's a really good thing to consider, and I've done that. So when I'm traveling, I record things as well. Like I said, now I'm going to be kind of pushing the limits with the 360-degree camera, and give the opportunity for those projects. But the great thing is, you know, any teacher could record something, and then if there is a place for other teachers to access that, then they could incorporate that into their classroom as well. And even if you don't have the technology to project up on a screen in your classroom, even if you as the teacher can at least watch it, can take the ideas from it, you're still bringing that back into the classroom that is pulling in some global aspect to it. And so again, you know, with the global citizen aspect of this, I think that's that's really important. So yeah, it's great to see all the things that some of you are talking about that you've done in your classrooms as well. So any other questions, ideas? A lot of things going in. It's always nice to hear people's voices too. You guys are like my students. You're like, I'm not going to say anything. So yeah, getting people to talk is always challenging. Yeah, now I'm wondering, like, is my audio even working? But no.
It's working. It's working.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We have
Thank you.
Helen. We have Helen here raising her hand. So Helen, maybe you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi. My audio bueno?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, David, for this wonderful opportunity to learn from you. So I just wanted to say that I think from your experience, I was able to see how my actions have also in line with what you have done so far. So I want to just share what I did this term. So I think 3 weeks ago, I showed my students something on Instagram about a young girl of 15 years who was invited to the COP27 to share about her project she was working on about plastics in oceans, gathering plastics and trying to make sure that other young persons also have this mindset. So when I showed them about the young lady, our young girl, what she was doing, so they were excited. Like they started asking me how they can do such a thing at that younger age. So I think that is what teaching around the world is all about. So when they saw that young girl, they wanted to speak with her more. So when I had to share the story, I tagged the girl on Instagram, and then she showed interest to come join us in our class for the next term. So by January, when we'll be coming back for the next term, she would like to now teach the students by herself how she had been able to do these things for the past years, even though she's just 15 years. So I think that is what this is all about. So thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, that another really great thing, and I forgot to mention this particular project from the social entrepreneurship class. I've got a great friend in Kusumu, Baldina, and she runs a program called Alice Visionary that works with young women. And, you know, I was talking in my social entrepreneurship class that in many parts of the world, girls miss up to 25% of their education only because they menstruate and they don't have access to products. And so they skip school that week by no fault of their own. And so my students created a project with the young women in Kenya to make sure they had access to things that help them go to school full time. And so, you know, it's why should young women miss sometimes 25% of their education? So sometimes that real sense of community can be so powerful. And so, yeah, that's great to hear. So, yeah, even any other stories that anyone has. I mean, it's yeah, again, I love hearing what other people are doing. And the cool thing is, by hearing these stories, sometimes when you do things like this, you feel like you're an island of your own, like you're an island by yourself and you're the only one doing it. And so this is a great opportunity to hear these things and go, oh, well, other people are doing this stuff too. So that's really important. At least I think. I just think knowing other people are thinking the same way can be very empowering to make you want to continue to do what you're doing. So, yeah. Any other questions? Any other stories? I know this is I know it's a Saturday. Thank you all for showing up. I mean, luckily I'm a morning person, so this was fine for me. I didn't mind getting up early. This was fun. So yeah. Anything else? I know we were going to go till about, I think, 9:30ish my time. But I certainly don't want to, let's see, planning events, holding events between students, please. Okay. That would be good. Yeah. And hopefully what would be great, I would absolutely love to hear from any of you. Stay in touch, make connections, maybe even connect students. And I haven't really seen where everybody's from that's here today. Heck, maybe I'd even be, maybe if the opportunity presents itself, I could come and visit and teach from there. Like I'm always looking for potential connections. And so I would think I'm trying to think what would be the best way tell you what, why don't I in the yes, I would love to come to Greece too. I've been there, but yeah. Let me type in the chat box real quick. Yeah, it would be great to start a WhatsApp group, but I'm going to type into the chat my email address, and you guys are welcome to reach out to me and ask me any questions, make connections, develop connections, like whatever else. So let me just type this in here. And so this is instead of a school email address, I'd rather use my personal one. Just so please feel free to reach out and yeah, make connections and oh yes, and WhatsApp, yeah, we can do that as well. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that we have Glenda Torres here. So maybe we can hear her.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Glenda.
Hi,
Yes.
hi, David. Hi, how you doing? Thank you so much. When at the beginning, when you shared your experience that you and your students were reading a book, and then you were able to share the experience with students from Kenya who actually lived the story, I am thankful for you to sharing that, because I am English foreign language students, and in our English text, there is a lot of reading articles about other countries, and that gave me an idea. It's like we can reach a school from one of the countries where we read this article and share the experience with the people from that country. That way the students can learn the story from first-hand information. So I wanted to thank you for giving me that idea.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a great way. That sounds like a wonderful thing to try. So yeah, that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. I don't know if we have any more questions in the chat. I see a lot of thank you. So I think we're all really grateful to you and to your experiences, and even with your openness to write to you and to get to you at some point if we can make some connections. So I don't know if someone else wants to jump in. Please raise your hand, or maybe just unmute yourselves.
Yeah.
If not, I think that will be it for today. and we can just let everyone enjoy their Saturdays. I think we all started a good Saturday with you, David. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Wonderful to virtually meet you all, and certainly look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna,
Yeah, I'll let you end it.
yeah, I'm gonna do that, but I'm just letting some minutes because people are still writing the thank you notes to you.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, we're also grateful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're all like, keep up the good job, David. Thank you for the
Well,
amazing presentation.
I'm glad I could pass on my kind of lucky experiences.
We are lucky to hear you. Well, okay, I think that's enough. Thank you again, everyone, for
You bet.
connecting today, and have a nice Saturday.
You
Goodbye.
too. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.